so good to be here and see so many familiar faces and to meet new faces and new friends. I am just so thrilled to be here this morning and to get the opportunity to worship with you again. I am coming from sunny Southern California, which is a little bit of a different weather change than Minnesota, but let me tell you, it is warmer in Minnesota today than it is back in Riverside, California. So I came here the right weekend. This morning and this weekend, it has just been an honor to spend some time with the ladies of the Minnetonka Church and the community. And last night we came together and we had a little bit of a spa night. And it was so nice just being able to relax and to do some facials, some nails. We did some foot scrubs. It was just so nice to just sit back and relax a little bit. So if you see some women glowing today, that is why. Say a little hello. If you see some fearful women that are a little worried, it's because we're all unsure who's cooking lunch today. So that's a little bit why, but we're excited, gentlemen, to see you part of this lunch today. This morning, I want to expand a little bit about what we talked about yesterday, last night at our spa night, and that is the story of Esther. When the Women's Ministries group and Donna came to me and said that their theme was true beauty, and shared with me the verse, 1 Samuel 16:7, but the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at, but the people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So Donna and the Women's Ministries team said, we are going to focus on true beauty, and you can take that any way you want. And so as I started to think about true beauty and scripture, the person that came to mind was Queen Esther. Queen Esther truly encapsulated what true beauty is all about. Simply but truthfully saying that the voice... What? I just realized that I opened the wrong sermon. Okay, sorry. Last night we started talking about the story of Queen Esther. And just to give you a little synopsis of what we talked about last night, we talked about the first chapter of Esther. Now, the first chapter of Esther actually doesn't mention Queen Esther at all, but it talks about the person who came before Queen Esther, Queen Vashti. Now, she was somebody who said no to the king, and we learned and talked about last night how when she said no, all of the king's wisest men were utterly concerned that kingdoms surrounding the area would shut down, would be messed up, and would just go in utter chaos because of the fact that she had said no to the king. We talked about how our voice as women and humans hold power, that our voice holds strength. We also talked about how she held value. And so when she said no to the king, she was saying no to what she felt was not for her. And so she decided to move forward in what she knew was valuable. And so she moved forward and was no longer able to be queen because of that. So simply but truthfully saying that our voices hold power and our titles don't hold value. Our value is held simply in the fact that we are a child beloved by God. So this morning, we're going to continue our story in the book of Esther, diving a little bit deeper past chapter 1 into the next few chapters. And for those of you who know the story of Esther, you may know kind of the premise of it already. And so we're not going to really dive into the specific details of the story, but more so do a zoomed out version and then focus on the specific points that I want to get at this morning. But for those of you who may not know the story of Esther, let's quickly recap the story, and I encourage you to take a look at it a little bit later. But the king of this story has a little bit of too much of a wild time at his party, and long story short, dismisses the former king and finds himself in the place of looking for a new one. The king at this point starts the first season of the hit show on ABC called The Bachelor. And he goes far and wide looking for a new queen. He says, I want the prettiest person. I want the best looking person. And so the town, the area, the nations, the empire brings all of these women together. And Queen Esther is one of them. They spend literal months in a spa process. Ladies, the last night was just the beginning for what these ladies went through. They spent months preparing to meet the king. And when the king sees Esther eventually, he is very well pleased and immediately makes her queen. So everyone's still with me, right? This is kind of the premise of Esther. So the new chosen queen, Esther, cousin and adopted daughter of Mordecai the Jew, Mordecai has a bitter enemy named Haman. Now, I don't know if you have seen the VeggieTales version of this, but every time I think of the story of Esther, I can't help but think of cucumbers and VeggieTale scenes. But if that's what's in your mind with you, just stay with me. But Mordecai's bitter enemy is Haman, and he just happens to be the right-hand man of the king. Mordecai fails to bow to Haman. And Haman then says, I'm not only going to kill Mordecai, but I'm going to kill all of the other Jews in the area. And so Mordecai calls on the queen, Esther, to save his people. And just not only Mordecai, but also the Jews. And Esther heroically risks her own life to ensure that her people and her family are saved. She invites the king and Haman to 2 banquets where she persuades the king to both save her people and to also get rid of Haman. We'll just leave it at that. So again, I know that's a really fast synopsis of the story of Esther, but that's not necessary. We're going to dive a little bit more into the points of Esther and what we see her true beauty characteristics throughout the book. This morning, the first thing that really stood out to me in the book of Esther, when I see Esther's true beauty, is in her understanding that her past doesn't dictate her future. And that's, I think, a beautiful lesson for each and every single one of us, is that our past as humans doesn't dictate our future. I don't know if I shared this story when I was pastoring here, and if I did, I apologize, and I'm sorry that I'm going to make a fool of myself by telling you this story once again, but when I was about the age of getting a permit, I was super excited about driving. I was like, I'm going to get a driver's license, I'm going to get my permit, I'm going to be driving all around town, nobody will have to take me places. I am just so excited to get behind the car. And so right before I turned that age, I started studying for the DMV test. I was getting the book. I was making little flashcards. I went into that DMV so prepared to take the test. So I go in, I take the test, feeling really confident. The last question comes, the screen comes that says if I passed or failed, and in big black letters it said, failed. And I was like, what? I was so prepared for this. So I walked out and I was just so disappointed. And so I asked, I was like, Dad, I think I want to go back next week. I'm going to study a little bit harder. I'm going to do this a little bit more, and I'm going to pass next week. So I went back the next week. I was even more prepared than I was the last time. I was so excited. I walked in there. I took all the tests. I was a little concerned with some of the questions, but I was like, I think I still have enough to pass. I got there. The score thing comes up in big black letters, failed once again. I was like, man, this is embarrassing. 2 times in a row? Yikes. So then I got really worried. I was like, I'm never going to pass this test. I'm never going to drive. And so I waited months to take the permit test again. So a few months go by, and finally I work myself up. I still had been studying throughout these months, and I say, all right, this is the time I'm going to go in. So I go into the DMV, I take the test. I'm feeling confident more than I had ever before. And then the score sign comes up, and guess what, my friends? I failed again. I failed again. That's the third time. And at this point, Donna's like, I can't believe I'm letting her use my car. But I failed again. So this time I was utterly disappointed. I was in shock that I had failed a test, not only once, not only twice, but 3 times. So again, a couple months go by and I do the same thing. And this happens in a total of 5 times. I failed the permit test 5 times. And so I give you all of this background and this embarrassment to simply say that when I moved to California and I walked into the DMV, I only went there to get a new license and my California plates. However, if you didn't know that in the state of California, you actually have to retake the permit test in order to get a license. And I did not do the research on that beforehand. I thought it was like Minnesota where you don't have to retake the test. You can just go in with your valid license. It says it's proof that you took it eventually. And so I went in, I got my plates, and then the lady hands me a clipboard. And she says, the testing area is over there. And I said, I think you're a little mistaken. Like, I don't need a test. I just need to get my license. And she goes, no, like, you have to take the license test in order to get a license here. My heart sank. Because all of a sudden, I realized, and in my mind, I went back to being a teenager again. I went back to the moments in where I had failed that test 5 times. I had failed 5 times, and I could only think, I have to move back to Minnesota because there's no license test here, and I'm never going to drive again. Like, my license was about to expire. And all of these thoughts were going through my mind, and panic was setting in. And so I sat there with my little clipboard and my paper and my pen, and I sat there for probably a good hour overthinking each question. I was making little diagrams. I was making hand motions everywhere. People probably thought, I don't know what they thought, but I was sitting there and I was so scared of what the results were going to be. So I took my clipboard up to the lady at the desk, and she began to grade it right in front of me. Like, how terrifying is that? When teachers grade something right in front of you, you're like, ooh. And she starts making marks, like a lot of marks. And I'm like, either that's good or bad. Like, I don't know. So she looks up at me and she goes, you got an 84%. Now, again, I didn't even know I had to take the test. So usually in the book it says what the percentage is that you have to pass. I didn't know what the percentage is. And I'm not good at math, so 84 was like not great, but like not bad either. So I was like, man, I think I failed. So I immediately said, hey, when can I retake the test? And she turned to me and she goes, you don't have to retake it. You already passed. And I was like, wow, what a blessing. The peace that was in my heart was so big. I was so incredibly thankful. But that is just a simple story to say that our past doesn't dictate our future. Even though I had failed miserably 5 times in a row, my past did not dictate my future. And friends, I'm here to tell you today that our past, no matter where we have lived or what our history is, whether good or bad, what our mistakes were publicly or privately, our past doesn't dictate our future. We can move forward faithfully and confidently, knowing that God has a plan, a hope, and a future. And this is where it gets really, really exciting, is that we as individuals make up a church body as well. And so that means that not only as us individually have a wonderful life ahead of us in God, it means that the collective body as well still has a plentiful future ahead. Let me say that one more time, that the story of Esther is living proof that our past does not dictate our future, not only for us as individuals, but also for a collective body as well. The story of Esther is living proof that our future is not dictated on how many lows we have. It's not dictated on how many letdowns have taken place, and it's not dictated on how many changes have occurred. The true beauty is simply living proof that God's will always prevails, and God's mission can never be stopped. Our past does not dictate our future. The second point that I take from the story of Esther is that when God speaks, there are no mistakes. When God speaks, there are no mistakes. We can open our Bibles to the first book, to the first page in the Bible, and we see that when God speaks, beautiful and incredible things happen. God spoke this world into existence, making the stars and the sky and the moon and the plants and the animals around us. When God speaks, beauty can happen. And I think all too often we sometimes think that we may know a little bit more than God. And so we say, hey, I think that you're calling me this way, but that's a little more uncomfortable, and I don't want to do that. And so we go a separate direction, or we do what we need to do, thinking that God is, maybe we're misinterpreting God, or maybe God is making a mistake in the way we're calling us. But friends, I'm here to say that God doesn't make mistakes. Last night, we briefly talked about how we are created in the image of God and how God is in us every single day. And so I know that when I was younger and when I was in high school and stuff, I often would forget this, that I was created in the image of God. And that when people look at me, they're looking at the image of God. They're seeing the love that God has. And so I often read Genesis, that verse that says we are created in God's image, to simply remind myself that not only does God never speak a mistake, but also God doesn't make mistakes either, my friends. And so I want you to know today, old and young and everything in between, that God doesn't make mistakes, that you are created for a purpose and for a reason, that you are here now because God doesn't make mistakes. The third point that I want us to simply talk about is that our strength doesn't come from us. Our strength doesn't come from us. Last night, I shared a little bit about my last experience in my church before going to the church I'm at now. And after leaving that church, I was a little unsure of what my future held. I kind of had quit with no job lined up and was a little unsure of where I was going to next. And so, like any sane person with not knowing what their future holds in front of them, I left the country. I was like, can't do this anymore. I booked a ticket to Ireland, and I went to Ireland. And let me tell you, it was the best choice I had ever made. I was stressed, and I was anxious, and I was heavy-hearted. And I booked this ticket to Ireland, and I walked off the plane, got on a train, and went straight to my Airbnb to this small coastal town in Howth, Ireland. And this is, I think, this is one of the streets in Howth, and I got there, and I was just simply at peace when I got there. I looked around at the town, and I saw the beautiful view that this coastal town had, and I was simply reminded that my heavy heart was no longer needing to be heavy, and that I was safe, and that I was sure. And so I went to this little town, and as I started to walk around, I mainly was looking at this side of the city, at the boats, and this gentleman who was playing guitar, and I just really, truly felt at peace. And as I stood at the water's edge, I saw this little boat harbor and ended up focusing a little bit too much on that. And then when I turned around, I saw this mountain here. And I don't know if you can really capture how green the green is in this picture, but the green was like a green I've never seen before. And I'm from Portland, Oregon, so that state is green, let me tell you. But this mountain was so bright and so vibrantly green. And I stood there in awe of this mountain. I stood there in awe because I had never seen something so beautiful before. And you may be looking at it and you're like, that is just a collection of rocks and grass, Elizabeth. That is nothing different. But for me, in that moment, it was a metaphor of how God had used me and had brought me to the place where I needed to be. And it wasn't because of the strength of myself, but it was because of the strength of God. I stood there and cried for a really long time, embarrassingly enough. And not because I thought I saw a beautiful mountain, even though it was, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Peace knowing that God gave me the strength to leave something that wasn't good for me. Peace knowing that I was safe. And peace knowing that even though it was hard, God brought me to the other side. When Esther was reminded that she had been queen for such a time as this, in chapter 4 we read that that she is being told, this is such a time as this. She grew strength to save the Jews. And that was not just the strength she had in her pocket and that she was saving for a rainy day. This was the strength that God blessed her with. The strength to know that even in the unknown, God was still there. And the strength to do what felt impossible made possible. You see, Esther's true beauty didn't come from having famous family members. It didn't come from having a really wonderful family lineage. It didn't come from the talent and fancy looks that she had, even though everyone called her beautiful. Esther's true beauty didn't come from money or anything that we would look at to say that is successful. Esther's true beauty came from the fact that despite all of the challenges that she was dealt with, she had trust and faithfulness in God, and that never wavered. Church, what would it look like if we lived our lives the same way? What if we lived out the same way of trust and faithfulness that Esther did? A trust that does not fear progress due to our history. Faith and faithfulness that says when God speaks, there is never a mistake. And strength to remind ourselves that God is leading through strength, even when we may not think it, know it, or feel it. What would it look like to live out that type of true beauty within ourselves and our church family as well? Thank you so much.